Now, class, I would like to explain to you why writing a good analysis paper is like making a quality sandwich. And also, I'll explain why I'm even talking about sandwiches in the first place. But before I get started, make sure you are in a place you can pay attention, and you might even want to gather the things you need to take notes. Often, when students struggle with writing quality analysis papers, it is because of a couple different things, but it all boils down to proportions. Like in a sandwich, proportions in an analysis paper are important to consider. I frequently get papers that completely summarize a text, or they identify elements and draw a long quote from the text as proof that element is being used. These are both ways to write very bad papers. First, this is a literary analysis paper, and part of the game is that you draw passages from the primary text you are analyzing. The primary text, of course, is the story, poem, or play that is the focus of your paper. We do this for several reasons: to ground our papers in the text and avoid summary, to focus our discussions on a particular vital passage, so we can explain how and why it is important. That is the good stuff in a paper. Or, you can use a short quoted passage as a way to prove a point that is debatable or vital in the text. So where does the sandwich come in? Let me explain. Of course I am talking in metaphor here, but there is a similar art to constructing a quality sandwich and a quality analysis paper. Every sandwich needs bread. Without it, you don't have a sandwich. You have a mess. In an analysis paper, the thing that keeps your paper from becoming a pile of mess are the examples or direct quotes from the text. Of course, I am talking about the work of literature, not secondary sources, but the sandwich metaphor works well for that too. But I'll get to that later. So, we need to draw short quotes from the text for mostly structural reasons. However, if you stop here, you mostly have a loaf of bread. That makes a horrible sandwich. If I paid $8 for a couple slices of bread, I'd be grumpy. So as any good sandwich maker knows, you need to add the good stuff, the meats, the cheeses, and vegetables, to the sandwich. First, you lead into any quote or passage by adding a couple vegetables, some lettuce, maybe a couple nice thick slices of tomato. This is to introduce your quote and place it in the context of your argument. Then you add the quote, the slice of bread. The quote does not need to be long, and should be as short as it can be. If all you need are 4 words, then summarize what comes before it and quote those 4 words. After the passage, you lay down the meat of the paper, the analysis. This is where you break down the specific passage, how it is significant to the whole, and how it informs your thesis. By inform, I mean that your analysis should always have your thesis in mind. Your discussion might contradict or complicate it, but it should always address the thesis in some way and why it is important to your central argument. Now, I don't know about you, but I like a sandwich with a lot of cold cuts, and so does the rest of America. Now, I won't go into the different types of meat, and if you're a vegan, please feel free to replace the bologna with tofu, or hummus, or a thick portobello mushroom. My point is that this is what you are paying your money for. This is the heart of the sandwich. It should be good stuff, and there better be more than 1 or 2 thin, measly slices. The problem I get most of the time is that student papers will have long quotes from the text and little to say about them. That is a sandwich with a lot of bread and 1 thin slice of ham between them. It may officially be a sandwich, but if that was a sandwich I ate, I would be very disappointed, no matter how good the ham is. Heap that stuff on. Don't be skimpy on the detailed analysis. So now you are probably asking, what do I write about then? And exactly how do I expand my analysis? Glad you asked. There are a couple things you can do to draw out your analysis, different lunch meats you can mix in for tasty results. First, you can look at specific key images, symbols, or any figurative language. These are also elements you can dig into and start making connections with. What concepts do the symbols embody? What is the metaphor comparing? Why? Remember to always ask, why? Second, you might look at specific keywords and discuss their subtle connotations. This is similar to looking at specific images, but instead you are looking at the social implications of language. Third, you might draw a quote from a pivotal passage and then discuss how and why it is pivotal to the entire work. Fourth, you might offer alternate interpretations of a specific passage. However, you may entertain alternate interpretations briefly. You should typically privilege your primary interpretation. You always remember to keep your thesis in mind. Without that toothpick touching every slice, the whole thing would topple over. And there you are, without a knife and fork. Should you want, or more accurately, need, to include secondary sources, the sandwich metaphor works for that too. You still lay down some vegetables to lead into your bread before you throw down some meat. Let me rephrase that. You still lead into the quote by giving it context in your paper before you discuss the larger issues the passage brings up. There. The trick again is sufficiently discuss the passage you draw from the text. Do more than summarize. You can assume anyone reading your paper, i.e., me, your teacher, has already read the text. But you also need to remind me of specific parts and why they are important to your argument. Although I run the risk of mixing my metaphors, I will give you one last bit of advice that centers around the number 3. With every passage, example, quote, detail, or whatever, you should have 3 interesting things to say about it. By thinking of 3 things, not only are you drawing out the analysis, but your analysis is building stronger connections. The first connection you come up with is typically obvious. If it is the first thing that pops into your head, it may very well be the first thing to pop in someone else's head too. But by the time you get to the third reason or point, you will be making some more interesting connections. I promise. This is called the power of 3, which is a general law I borrowed from Schoolhouse Rock and the show Charmed, that says doing something 3 times creates a pattern. Something happens once, it could be an accident. Twice, it could be a coincidence. 3 times, however, makes it a rule. It gives you authority in your paper and strengthens your analysis in at least 3 ways. So now that I've revealed this little sandwich trick, you should be able to expand every paper by both adding more key passages and by discussing the passages you draw from the text more deeply. You can always add more meat to the sandwich. If you follow this pattern, your papers will improve dramatically in content, which is a good thing. So get to making metaphorical sandwiches, or real sandwiches if all this talk has made you hungry.